The autumn wind howled across the Montana plains as cattle rancher Eddie McKenna rode toward the old abandoned barn on what he thought was the far corner of his newly purchased property. The previous owner, a reclusive man named Harrison Walsh, had died without heirs, and Eddie had bought the land sight unseen from the territorial bank, planning to expand his grazing operation. What he discovered in that weathered barn would change his understanding of both property ownership and human responsibility forever. As Eddie pushed open the creaking barn door, expecting to find nothing but old hay and rusted equipment, he was startled to see a small figure scramble into the shadows behind a pile of feed sacks. "Who's there?" Eddie called out gently, his experienced eye catching glimpses of torn clothing and a thin, frightened face peering out from behind the makeshift hiding place. "Please don't hurt me, mister," came a small voice from the shadows. "I know I ain't supposed to be here, but I got nowhere else to go." Eddie dismounted and approached slowly, his hands visible and empty to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you, son. What's your name?" A boy who couldn't have been more than 11 years old emerged hesitantly from his hiding spot. His clothes were patched and dirty, his dark hair hung in his eyes, but there was something about his posture that suggested pride despite his desperate circumstances. "My name's Daniel Walsh, sir," the boy said quietly. "I've been living here since my parents died of fever last spring." Eddie felt his heart clench with sympathy and surprise. "Walsh, was Harrison Walsh your father?" Daniel nodded, his green eyes filling with tears he tried hard to hide. "Yes, sir. After Pa died, some men came and said the bank owned everything now. They took our cattle and horses, said there weren't no money left to pay the debts, but they never knew about me hiding in the barn." Eddie's mind raced as he processed this information. Harrison Walsh had had a son, which meant the land sale might not have been legal. More importantly, this child had been living alone in the barn for months, surviving on his own through a harsh Montana winter. "Daniel," Eddie said gently, kneeling down to the boy's eye level, "how have you been surviving out here? What have you been eating?" Daniel's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I set snares for rabbits, sir, and there's wild berries in summer, roots and such. Sometimes I'd catch fish in the creek. I tried real hard not to take nothing that didn't belong to me." Eddie looked around the barn, noting the neat pile of blankets in one corner, the small store of dried meat and preserved berries, the carefully arranged collection of simple tools and supplies. This child had been living like a wild creature, but he had done so with remarkable organization and resourcefulness. "Daniel, you said your father was Harrison Walsh. Do you have any papers, any documents that might prove that?" The boy's face brightened slightly. "Yes, sir. Pa always kept important papers in a special place. Said if anything happened to him, I should show them to a lawyer or a judge." Daniel led Eddie to a corner of the barn where loose boards had been carefully ranged to hide a small cavity in the wall. From this hiding place, he pulled out a leather pouch wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside were documents that made Eddie's breath catch: Harrison Walsh's will, Daniel's birth certificate, and a deed showing that Harrison had owned the land free and clear, with no outstanding debts to the bank. "Daniel," Eddie said slowly, studying the papers, "these documents suggest that you're the rightful owner of this land, not me. Your father left everything to you in his will." The boy stared at Eddie with confusion and disbelief. "But the bank, men said Pa owed money, that everything had to be sold to pay his debts." Eddie's jaw tightened with anger as he began to understand what had happened. Someone at the bank had lied about Harrison Walsh's debts, probably planning to sell the valuable land and pocket the proceeds. They had assumed there were no heirs, never imagining that a young boy was hiding in an old barn to frighten to reveal himself. "Daniel," Eddie said firmly, "I think someone has committed a serious crime here. They stole your inheritance and tried to sell land that legally belongs to you." "But I'm just a kid," Daniel said helplessly. "Nobody's gonna believe me over important men from the bank." Eddie studied the boy's thin face and saw not just fear, but the kind of intelligence and character that reminded him of his own childhood struggles after his parents died. "Daniel, what if I told you that I believe you? What if I said I'd help you get your land back?" Daniel's eyes widened with desperate hope. You'd really do that? But why? You don't even know me. Because it's the right thing to do. Eddie replied simply. And because I was about your age when my own parents died. I know what it's like to be alone and scared with nowhere to turn. As they talked, Eddie learned more about Daniel's remarkable survival story. The boy had not only managed to feed and shelter himself for months, but he had also continued to care for the few animals his father had hidden from the bank's seizure. An old milk cow, some chickens, and a mare that was heavy with foal. I couldn't let them take Buttercup, Daniel explained, leading Eddie to a small lean-to behind the barn where a gentle brown cow grazed peacefully. Pa said she was the best milk cow in 3 counties, and she's been giving me milk and butter. All this time, Eddie was amazed by the boy's resourcefulness and responsibility. Daniel, you've done something remarkable here. You've not only survived on your own, you've thrived. Your father would be proud of you. The boy's composure finally cracked at those words, and tears streamed down his face. I miss him so much, Mr. McKenna. Every night I dream that he's coming back. But then I wake up and remember he's gone forever. Eddie put a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder. I know that feeling, son. The missing never completely goes away, but it gets easier to bear when you have people around you who care. Mr. McKenna, Daniel said hesitantly, what's gonna happen to me now, even if you can prove the land is mine? I'm just a kid. I can't run a ranch by myself. Eddie had been thinking about exactly that question, and he had an idea that might solve several problems at once. Daniel, what would you say to a partnership? You own this land legally, but you need someone with experience to help you develop it. I need more grazing land for my cattle, but I believe in doing business honestly. What kind of partnership? Well, we could work together to build up this ranch. I'd provide the cattle, the expertise, and the business connections. You'd provide the land and learn the ranching business alongside me. We'd split the profits fairly. And when you're old enough, you'd have the knowledge and resources to run the whole operation yourself. Daniel's eyes lit up with excitement. You mean I could really be a rancher like my pa wanted? More than that. Eddie replied with a smile. With proper management, this could become one of the finest spreads in Montana territory. But their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Through the barn window, Eddie could see 3 men riding hard toward them, and he recognized the lead rider with a sinking heart, Cornelius Blackwood, the banker who had sold him the supposedly ownerless land. Daniel, Eddie said quietly, I think we're about to have some unwelcome visitors. Stay close to me and let me do the talking. Blackwood rode up to the barn with 2 other men, his face flushed with anger and concern. McKenna, what are you doing out here? And who is that boy? Eddie stepped protectively in front of Daniel. Mr. Blackwood, this is Daniel Walsh, the son and heir of Harrison Walsh. It appears there was a significant error in your land sale. Blackwood's face went pale as he saw the documents in Eddie's hand. That's impossible. Harrison Walsh had no heirs. We conducted a thorough search. Did you now? Eddie asked coldly. Because it seems to me that a thorough search would have included checking the buildings on the property for anyone who might be living there. Daniel stepped out from behind Eddie, his young voice clear and strong despite his fear. Mr. Blackwood, I remember you. You came to our house right after Pa died. You said you were sorry for our loss, but you never asked if there were any children. Blackwood's companions exchanged nervous glances as they realized the implications of what they were hearing. If Harrison Walsh had indeed left an heir, the land sale was illegal, and they could all face serious criminal charges. This is preposterous. Blackwood blustered. You can't expect us to believe that a child has been living out here alone for months without anyone knowing. Why not? Daniel replied with dignity beyond his years. Adults aren't the only ones who know how to survive. And maybe if you'd cared enough to really look for Pa's family, you would have found me. Eddie smiled with pride at the boy's courage. Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you examine these documents very carefully, because if they're authentic, you and your associates have some serious explaining to do. Subscribe to our channel to see what happens next. Will Eddie and Daniel be able to prove the boy's rightful ownership? What dark secrets about the bank's land dealings will come to light? Don't miss the explosive next chapter where truth battles corruption in the Montana Territory. The confrontation in the old barn quickly escalated as Cornelius Blackwood realized the magnitude of his predicament. If Daniel Walsh was indeed the rightful heir to the land, the entire banking scheme would unravel, potentially exposing years of fraudulent land seizures and illegal sales. "Mr. McKenna," Blackwood said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, "surely you don't intend to take the word of some vagrant child over the official records of the Territorial Bank?" Eddie stepped closer to Blackwood, his weather-beaten face hard with determination. "Mr. Blackwood, I intend to take the word of legal documents and evidence. These papers clearly show that Harrison Walsh owned this land free and clear, and that he left it to his son Daniel in a properly witnessed will." Blackwood's two companions, whom Eddie now recognized as the bank's enforcers, moved their hands closer to their weapons. The situation was rapidly becoming dangerous. "Daniel," Eddie said quietly without taking his eyes off the three men, "I want you to take those papers and ride to town. Find Judge Morrison and show him everything we've discovered." But Daniel, despite his young age, had inherited his father's courage. "No, sir. This is my land and my fight. I'm staying right here." Blackwood sneered at the boy's defiance. "Child, you're living in a fantasy. Even if those papers are real, which I doubt, you're still just a minor with no legal standing. The bank's actions were perfectly justified." "Actually," said a new voice from the barn doorway, "the bank's actions appear to be criminal fraud." Everyone turned to see Judge Morrison himself entering the barn, accompanied by Sheriff Williams and a man Eddie didn't recognize, wearing a territorial marshal's badge. "Your Honor," Eddie said with relief, "thank goodness you're here. We've discovered some irregularities in the bank's handling of the Walsh property." Judge Morrison, a stern man in his 60s known for his fairness and integrity, approached Daniel with gentle interest. "Young man, I'm Judge Morrison. I understand you claim to be Harrison Walsh's son." "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, offering the leather pouch containing the documents. "These are the papers Pa kept hidden in the barn. He said they proved everything we owned." Judge Morrison examined the documents carefully, his experienced eye noting the official seals, proper signatures, and legal language that would be difficult to forge. "Marshal Davies, what's your assessment of these documents?" The territorial marshal, a man whose job it was to investigate fraud and corruption, studied the papers with professional interest. "Judge, these appear to be authentic. The will is properly witnessed, the deed is genuine, and there's no record of any liens or debts against this property in the territorial registry." Blackwood's face had gone white with fear. "This is impossible. We conducted a thorough investigation into Harrison Walsh's financial situation, did you?" Sheriff Williams asked pointedly, "Because it seems to me that a thorough investigation would have discovered that Walsh had a son living on the property." Daniel stepped forward, his young voice steady with righteous anger. "Mr. Blackwood, you never looked for me because you didn't want to find me. You wanted to steal our land and sell it for profit." Marshal Davies turned his attention to Blackwood with the focused intensity of a lawman who had uncovered corruption. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been investigating reports of irregular land seizures throughout the territory. Your bank has been involved in several suspicious transactions over the past 2 years." "That's ridiculous," Blackwood protested weakly. "All our transactions have been completely legal." "Have they?" Davies produced a notebook from his vest pocket. "The Henderson farm, seized for alleged debts that the family claims they never owed. The Martinez Ranch, sold for taxes that had already been paid. The Williams homestead, taken for a mortgage that was forged." "Should I continue?" Eddie watched with satisfaction as the web of corruption began to unravel. Blackwood's scheme had clearly been much larger than just the Walsh property. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Morrison said formally, "you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and theft of property. Sheriff Williams, please take him and his associates into custody." As the corrupt banker was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence, Daniel looked up at Eddie with tears of relief in his eyes. "Does this mean I really get to keep my land?" Judge Morrison smiled at the boy with grandfatherly kindness. "Son, this land belongs to you legally and morally. But there's still the practical question of how a young boy can manage a ranch property. Your Honor, Eddie said, Daniel and I have discussed forming a partnership. I would provide experience and resources, while he would contribute the land. We'd work together until he's old enough to manage everything independently. And you'd be willing to take legal guardianship of the boy? Marshall Davies asked. Eddie looked down at Daniel, seeing not just a property owner, but a brave, intelligent, young man who reminded him of his own younger self. If Daniel's willing, I'd be honored to be his guardian and partner. Mr. McKenna, Daniel said formally, extending his hand, I'd be proud to have you as my guardian and business partner. Judge Morrison observed the handshake with approval. Very well. I'll draw up the necessary legal documents to formalize both the guardianship and the business partnership. Mr. McKenna, you understand that you'll be responsible for Daniel's education, health, and general welfare. I do, Your Honor, and I take that responsibility seriously. Over the following weeks, as the legal paperwork was completed and Blackwood's criminal trial proceeded, Eddie and Daniel worked together to assess their combined property and plan for the future. What they discovered was even better than either had hoped. Eddie, Daniel said one morning as they rode across the newly combined rangeland. Pa always said this land had good water and grass, but I never realized how much we actually owned. Eddie nodded, studying the rolling hills and rich pastures that stretched as far as the eye could see. Daniel, with proper management, this could support twice as many cattle as I currently own. We're talking about building one of the largest and most successful ranches in Montana Territory. Pa would have liked that, Daniel said with a smile. He always dreamed of having a big operation, but he never had the capital or experience to make it happen. Well, now we have both, Eddie replied. Your land and my experience, combined with hard work and honest dealing, should make for a winning combination. That evening, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house Eddie was having built to replace Daniel's barn shelter, the boy asked a question that had been troubling him. Eddie, what's gonna happen to all the other families that Blackwood cheated? Will they get their land back too? Eddie smiled at the boy's concern for others, another sign of the good character Harrison Walsh had instilled in his son. Marshall Davies is working on that, Daniel. Your case gave him the evidence he needed to investigate all of Blackwood's transactions. Several families have already gotten their property back. I'm glad, Daniel said simply. Nobody should have their home stolen from them. No, they shouldn't, Eddie agreed. And thanks to your courage in revealing yourself and standing up for what was right, a lot of families are going to get justice. As they watched the sun set over their ranch, both of them reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had brought them together. Daniel had gone from a frightened boy hiding in a barn to the co-owner of a prosperous ranch, while Eddie had discovered that sometimes the best business decisions are the ones made with the heart rather than just the head. Eddie, Daniel said quietly, I know you didn't have to help me. You could have just kept quiet about the papers and kept the land for yourself. Eddie put his arm around the boy's shoulders in a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. Daniel, keeping stolen property would have made me no better than Blackwood. Besides, I've discovered that having a partner, especially one as smart and hardworking as you, is better than working alone, even if your partner is just a kid, especially if that kid has the kind of character and integrity you've shown. Eddie replied firmly, age doesn't determine worth, Daniel. Heart and principles do. Subscribe to our channel to see the heartwarming conclusion. How will Daniel adapt to his new life as both ranch owner and son? What challenges will he and Eddie face as they build their partnership? Don't miss the final chapter that shows how family can be found in the most unexpected places. 3 years had passed since Eddie McKenna had discovered 11-year-old Daniel Walsh hiding in that old barn, and their partnership had exceeded everyone's expectations. The Walsh-McKenna Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in Montana Territory, known not just for its fine cattle and horses, but for the fairness and integrity with which it was managed. Daniel, now 14, had grown tall and confident under Eddie's guidance, his education including not only reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also the practical skills of ranching, business management, and leadership. More importantly, he had learned the values that would guide him for the rest of his life: honesty, hard work, and concern for others. Eddie, Daniel called out one crisp spring morning as he rode up to the ranch house. At full gallop, his face bright with excitement. The telegram from Denver came in. "We got the contract." Eddie emerged from the house with a smile, knowing exactly what contract Daniel was referring to. They had been bidding to supply beef to the growing mining camps in Colorado, a deal that would significantly expand their operation. "The whole contract?" Eddie asked, though he could see the answer in Daniel's expression. "Every bit of it," Daniel replied, dismounting and waving the telegram. 3,000 head over 2 years, at premium prices. Eddie clapped his young partner on the shoulder with pride. "Daniel, do you realize what this means? We'll need to expand our herd, hire more hands, maybe even look at acquiring additional grazing land." "I've been thinking about that," Daniel said, his mature business sense showing despite his youth. "What about the old Henderson place? I heard Mrs. Henderson might be willing to sell since her husband died." Eddie nodded approvingly. Daniel had developed excellent instincts for the ranching business, and his suggestions were usually sound. "That's good thinking. The Henderson land borders ours on the north, and it has that good water access we'd need for a larger herd." Their business discussion was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure, Marshall Davies, looking official and slightly worried as he rode up to the ranch house. "Marshall," Eddie called out in greeting, "good to see you. What brings you out our way?" Marshall Davies dismounted with the serious expression of a man carrying troubling news. "Eddie, Daniel, I'm afraid I have some information that might affect you both." "What kind of information?" Daniel asked, his young face showing concern. "It's about Cornelius Blackwood. He was released from prison last week, and there are reports that he's been making threats against the people who testified against him." Eddie felt his jaw tighten with anger and protectiveness. "What kind of threats?" "The usual." Davies replied grimly. "Revenge against those who ruined his life. Talk about getting back what was stolen from him. Nothing specific enough to rest him for, but concerning enough that I wanted to warn you." Daniel straightened his shoulders with the kind of courage that had sustained him through his months alone in the barn. "Marshall Davies, Mr. Blackwood can make all the threats he wants. This land belongs to me legally, and I'm not afraid of him." Eddie smiled with pride at the boy's bravery, but his protective instincts were fully engaged. "Marshall, what can we do to protect ourselves legally?" "Keep doing what you're doing," Davies advised. "Run your ranch honestly, treat your workers fairly, and maintain good relationships with your neighbors. If Blackwood tries anything illegal, he'll find himself facing not just the law, but the entire community." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of multiple riders approaching. Through the dust, Eddie could see a group of their neighboring ranchers, led by Tom Henderson and Maria Santos, whose own properties had been restored after Blackwood's conviction. "Eddie, Daniel," Tom called out as the group approached. "We heard about your new contract. Congratulations." "Thank you," Daniel replied with the gracious manner Eddie had taught him. "We're excited about the opportunity to expand." Maria Santos, whose family had been among Blackwood's victims, smiled warmly at Daniel. "Young man, your courage in standing up to that banker saved all our families. We wanted to come by and offer our support for whatever you might need." "That's very kind, Mrs. Santos," Daniel said sincerely, "but we were just doing what was right." "Exactly," said another voice, and everyone turned to see Judge Morrison riding up with several other community leaders. "And that's why we're here." Judge Morrison dismounted with the formal dignity of his office. "Daniel, the Territorial Council has been reviewing your case and its impact on land fraud throughout the region. They've asked me to present you with something." The judge produced an official-looking document from his saddlebag. "Daniel Walsh, by order of the Territorial Council, you are hereby recognized as a young pioneer of justice for your courage in exposing corruption and your dedication to honest business practices." Daniel stared at the document in amazement. "Your Honor, I don't understand. I just told the truth about what happened to my family." "Son," Judge Morrison said gently, "sometimes telling the truth requires more courage than most adults ever show. Your willingness to come forward not only saved your own inheritance, but it helped dozens of other families recover their stolen land. Eddie felt his chest swell with pride as he watched Daniel accept the recognition with humility and grace. The frightened boy he had found in the barn had grown into a young man of character and integrity. "There's more," Tom Henderson announced. "The Ranchers Association has voted to make Daniel an honorary member, the youngest in the organization's history." As the celebration continued throughout the afternoon, with neighbors bringing food and sharing stories of their own recoveries from Blackwood schemes, Eddie reflected on how much their lives had changed since that autumn day 3 years ago. "Eddie," Daniel said quietly as the sun began to set and their guests prepared to leave, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, son. Do you ever regret it? Finding me in the barn? I mean, your life would have been a lot simpler if you just ignored that old barn and never known I was there." Eddie looked at the boy who had become the son he'd never had, thinking of all the joy, purpose, and meaning Daniel had brought to his life. "Daniel, finding you in that barn was the best thing that ever happened to me. You didn't just save your family's land. You saved me from a life of loneliness I didn't even realize I was living, but you gave up the land you thought you'd bought, took on the responsibility of raising someone else's child, shared your profits." "Daniel," Eddie interrupted gently, "I didn't give up anything. I gained everything that really matters. I gained a son, a partner, a purpose, and a family. I gained the satisfaction of helping justice prevail and watching you grow into the fine young man your father would be proud of." That night, as they sat on the porch of the comfortable ranch house that had replaced Daniel's barn shelter, both of them reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them together. "Eddie," Daniel said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about our expansion plans, and I have an idea." "What's that?" "What if we set aside part of our new land for young people who need a start in life? Kids who are in situations like I was in, who just need someone to give them a chance." Eddie smiled at the suggestion, seeing in it the generous heart that made Daniel special. "You mean like an apprentice program?" "Exactly. We could teach them ranching skills, help them get an education, and eventually help them start their own operations. Give them the kind of chance you gave me." "Daniel, that's a wonderful idea. Your father would be proud to know that his son is thinking about helping others, instead of just building wealth." Years later, the Walsh McKenna Ranch would become famous throughout the West, not just for its successful cattle operation, but for its apprentice program that helped dozens of young people build new lives on the frontier. Daniel would eventually marry, have children of his own, and pass down both the ranch and its values to the next generation. But he never forgot the lesson he learned that autumn day, when Eddie McKenna could have simply ignored an old barn and walked away, that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most unexpected places, and that family is built not just on blood, but on the choice to care for one another regardless of the circumstances that bring people together. The barn where Daniel had once hidden in fear and desperation was eventually torn down to make room for a modern stable, but its memory lived on as a symbol of hope, proof that even in the darkest places, with courage and the kindness of others, a person can find their way to the light. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories from the American frontier. This incredible tale of Daniel and Eddie proves that sometimes the most valuable property we can own is the love and trust of family, and that the greatest investments we make are in the people we choose to help along the way. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join us for more emotional journeys that show how unexpected discoveries can change not just individual lives, but entire communities. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that home isn't always where you start, but where you're welcomed with open arms.